Good morning, everyone, to this webinar. I'm Mary Wiley with Niagara Connects, and we're going to get started very shortly. This webinar is being hosted by Niagara Connects and INCommunities in partnership with the Niagara Community Foundation. So grab your cup of coffee and we'll guide you through some ideas for how you can leverage the evidence in the Living in Niagara report and 211 community data. I will be presenting today, and so will Tammy Dumas, who is Executive Director with INCommunities, and Joanne Crick, and she is the Director of Grants and Community Initiatives with the Niagara Community Foundation. And working in the background to help us have a successful event are Lisa Putman of INCommunities and Suzanne Veenstra, who's with the Community Foundation. And Suzanne will be facilitating the questions and answers portion towards the end of the webinar. But we want to begin, maybe we could go to the next slide, Lisa. We want to begin with a land acknowledgement this morning, and I will read that now. So as we begin, we acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So we'll begin by talking about the Living in Niagara report. Then we're going to take a bit of a focus on the community belonging sector as an example to help you be able to use the evidence that we're talking about and see how it kind of all fits together, and then how it works its way up to becoming sort of evidence in action, if you will, in the community. And then we'll have a conversation with you if you have any questions or thoughts or suggestions. We'd like to hear that and chat with you a bit. So on to the next slide. And so this is just a bit of context about Niagara Connect's role in the community and how the Living in Niagara report came to be, and how it is driven by the community, and the sort of the who, what, where, why, when, to help you understand then how to use it. So our role is to bring diverse people and organizations together to gather, share, use, and learn from reliable evidence. And that evidence may be anything from raw data sets to more processed information, where it's presented in information form. Perhaps it's anything from an annual report. It could be something very preliminary that a group is just starting to gather data in our community, and they're wanting to share that out and build partnerships to strengthen their work. And that frontline knowledge, that's the other sort of secret sauce ingredient to this work, is that it brings together what the data and evidence is showing. And that could be evidence from globally, nationally, provincially, locally, putting it together with what people who are working on the front lines know to be happening in the community now. And then the other piece is to look across the Living in Niagara sector. So those are the socioeconomic sectors, and identify what's emerging and what's of common concern across Niagara. And the whole purpose is to support focused, holistic planning for a stronger future. So integrated tools to support this work are the Living in Niagara report, and it comes out every 3 years, and the Niagara Knowledge Exchange. And these tools were described at the very, very beginning. The first Living in Niagara report came out in 2008, and the community said that they wanted to have some kind of a regular measure of quality of life in Niagara. And they also wanted to have more fluid access to reliable evidence, ideally Niagara focused evidence. And at the time, so remember, this work started back in 2005. And at the time, it was identified that there really wasn't as much really great Niagara-focused evidence to work with as they would have liked. And could we work together to sort of build that up? And that's where you see the knowledge exchange coming in, because they also said at the time, they wanted to have some kind of an online tool to be able to share evidence and update each other so that the right hand knows what the left is doing. So let's move to the next slide. So the Living in Niagara sectors, we present this report every 3 years. And the Living in Niagara sectors were described by the community, again, back when the Living in Niagara report was first built. And they've been updated a little bit in the time since. Basically, they align with the social determinants of health. So it's everything from, alphabetically speaking, arts, culture, and heritage to work and employment and everything in between. And the report weaves what's happening and what the evidence is telling us is happening in those sectors. It weaves it together so we get a new picture of Niagara that has some texture and context to it. And it reflects how people are living in our community. And we bring the data and information together with what people working on the front line in each of the sectors know is happening. The frontline community expert opinion leaders who come together have a Niagara-wide view. They know the evidence in their sector, and they can pull examples from their pocket right now of what's happening in Niagara today in that sector. And those people come together and they help us to just position the information in the report so that it makes sense and is in keeping with where things are at today. It points to what is emerging, so what's bubbling up. And those people come together and help us to put together the suggested community action steps for how Niagara can work together in that sector, in each of the sectors, to strengthen itself over the next 3 years. So let's go to the next slide, Lisa. So we hear, over the years, we've heard and we hear anecdotally through surveys from what we see, how the evidence in the report, in the Living in Niagara report, is being used. And people are using it, organizations are using it, institutions, researchers, educators, and businesses. And generally speaking, they're using it to inform priority setting, so decision making, to help secure funding, so evidence to make a business case. And that could be a business case for a not-for-profit organization, or there are lots of businesses that are using the report to help orient their work and their decision making, to support partnerships. And we know how important shared evidence and data and information and knowledge is to partnerships. We've learned a lot about that, I think, as a community through the collective impact model. That's one of the essential elements. So the more evidence we can share and talk about and learn together from, the stronger our partnerships will be and our decision making. And then learning about what's emerging in the Niagara context. So it helps to fast track environmental scans. We know this from, again, from what we've heard and what we see, that that's one of the ways that the report is being used. So let's go to the next slide. In the last couple of months, we did a survey to gauge how people are using the report, sort of update some of the information and how they're using the knowledge exchange. And these are some preliminary insights. So we're seeing that people are saying that they like to use the report and the knowledge exchange as tools to help them be aware of community trends, information, demographics, and data, to inform strategic planning, business planning, program planning, to access evidence, to support grant proposals, to support education and research, and to share evidence with community partners and to support partnerships. So we present this information to you because it may actually spark some ideas for you about how you can use the report and the knowledge exchange in ways that you maybe hadn't thought of before. So let's go to the next slide. So in the Living in Niagara Report 2020, which was released in May of 2020, 2021, I should say, we presented overall opportunities suggested for action. There are 10 of them, and we'll just highlight them in the next 2 slides. I must say that for the 2020 report, of course, we had no idea what was going to happen in 2020 when we were putting it together. And we sort of thought we had the report almost done, and then COVID started happening. So we took a little extra time to build that element into the report. And one of the most interesting things that came out of it was when we pulled the community expert opinion leaders together to talk about how we can strengthen Niagara as we're emerging from the pandemic in that particular sector. It was really interesting that some really strong themes came out. So the first one, and these are in no particular order, equity links to prosperity. We had seen that emerging in prior reports, and it came out loud and clear this time. Digital skills and access to technology are essential. I can clearly remember in the work and employment sector, the people who came around the table for that sector to help us tweak that sector of the report, they said, we've been emphasizing this for years, and now it is so apparent that having that access to, whether it's access to the internet, having the equipment, having the skills, this is important for people to be able to participate in the community and the economy. And then Niagara continues to grow. It will continue to grow. And very clearly, we want to see that growth balanced with inclusion in our community. And that's fourth one, community building is essential. I think this theme comes as no surprise because we almost need to figure out where we're going next as a community. And in order to stabilize, it's really going to require us all working together and being respectful of each other and understanding that we all just have to get back a little bit on our feet again. And connectedness and social inclusion are cornerstones of well-being. This evidence has come out repeatedly. We definitely see it through some of the age-friendly work being done in Niagara. The Canadian longitudinal study on aging evidence shows that being connected to people is a #1 predictor of our health and well-being as we age. So on to the next slide, Lisa. And so this is the other half of these themes. Feelings of loss are common. This came up primarily, it came up in the first place in the community belonging sector. We heard people saying that the philanthropic organizations in Niagara were hearing that people were missing out on the opportunity to support their favorite cause, to be able to get out to a fundraiser, to be able to volunteer. So that was where it started coming up. And then it came up across all of the sectors in some way or another. So we kept hearing the word uncertainty, people missing connections, and milestones. So no matter what age and stage we are at in life, there are milestones. And again, this came up over and over again, those feelings of loss. Another theme that came out is how important it is to keep working together as a community to, in a validated way, to help guide our decision making, keep an eye on what is emerging and the impact it's having in our community. And then the other theme that came out was let's learn lessons. Let's be open to what opportunities are arising from the pandemic experience and seeing how we can make those work for us. And then celebrating Niagara's strengths. This one really came out when it came to creating the conditions for hard-hit businesses to stabilize. Also, it came out in terms of our not-for-profit organizations because stabilizing is required there too, especially when it comes to the loss of some of the volunteering workers and their inability to be able to participate. So that theme came out. And then the 10th one, mental wellness for all ages. This remains an imperative forefront priority. And if you recall, Niagara Connects worked with the mental health and addictions groups in Niagara to build the mental health and addictions charter for Niagara. And that was launched way back in 2014. And the work to build it began in 2010. So this issue is here in our community. We acknowledge it. We are working together on it, and it is still a big priority. All right, so on to the next slide. And what I'm going to do is share my screen now and show you how to navigate on the Living in Niagara report website. All right, so you should be able to see that now. So it's at livinginniagarareport.com, and all of the information in the Living in Niagara 2020 report is right here on this page that you land on. So you may have been familiar in the past with what we call the print or the summary version. So you can see I've clicked on that here. You can pull that up. You can look at it. You can print it out if you have enough ink to do so, or you may want to just read it online. So it basically has some introductory pages, and then you get into the sectors. And some of those introductory pages have, that's where those overall opportunities suggested for action that we just looked at. And they also have just a bit of general demographic information about the region. So when you get down to page 8 here, you'll see that we're into the arts, culture, and heritage sector. And it has 2 pages in this summary version. What I want to draw your attention to is that in each of the sectors, there's a little bit of information about some things that are happening now in the community, and then what's emerging. And this emergence piece is important to keep an eye on, because what's emerging is quite often what ends up becoming an issue or a priority a little later on. So if you're doing planning, it's really important to take a look at that and be aware of it and just pay attention to. And then the suggested community action steps are, again, this is what can we do over the next 3 years to help close some gaps or address some issues in Niagara. And they're suggested community action steps. So the idea is that people using the report will potentially see themselves in these action steps and say, hey, I could really work on that. I'd like to partner with another organization, and maybe we can do something about that. Now, I will draw your attention to the indicators. So just make sure you look at the indicators in the sector that or sectors you're looking at, because what you want to do is go to the measures for the indicators. I'm going to show you now where you can find those. And I think this is the piece where I see a lot of people saying, oh, now I understand it. So let's go to the community belonging sector, because we sort of thought we would zero in on it as an example today. And you'll see that all come together in this webinar. So in each of so this is community belonging. So there's the 11 sectors, arts, culture, and heritage through to work and employment. In community belonging, you'll see that the 2 pages that were in the summary version, just let me go back here. Okay, the 2 pages in the summary version are there, and then there's a technical document as well. So the technical document is, to me, it's sort of where I've often referred to it as where the gold mine is hidden, but it's here, right here on this website. You can find it. So this technical document has all of the information for the community belonging sector in one place. So you'll see that it's a PDF, basically of a Word document that has the same information in it as those 2 pages for community belonging that are in the summary report. You'll see the indicators here. And then when you get to everything from page 3 to 42 is evidence to support those indicators. So in the case here of charitable giving, the very first thing you'll see is the proportion of charitable donors among tax filers for Niagara. It is for the St. Catharines, Niagara census metropolitan area. And we always note that does not include Grimsby and West Lincoln. Our role is to find the evidence that exists and help you then connect with it so that you can learn from it and perhaps use it to strengthen your work. And in this indicator as well, you'll find information about our philanthropic organizations and so on and so forth. So what we want you to be able to see, rather than me scrolling through and clicking through the whole document, just think of all of these measures that you find in here. And I will just go through to a couple more pages. So for example, the Community Foundation's annual report, the United Way's annual report, and other organizations that are involved in charitable works in Niagara. So you can look at this information, and if it isn't the most recent information, you can click here to find a pathway to find the most recent information. So keep in mind, this report comes out every 3 years, and you might want to find something a little more recent. So you can look, go to this link on the StatsCan website and find perhaps updated information if that's what you're looking for. So and there is a sector technical document for every sector. So I guess if there's something to walk away with today, make sure you go in and take a close look at those technical documents if you're trying to make a business case. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll go back into the slides. Lisa will put those up. And now Joanne Crick from the Community Foundation is going to talk to you about the granting priorities of the foundation and how that ties in with the Living in Niagara report.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanne Crick. I'm the Director of Grants at the Niagara Community Foundation. We're pleased to have partnered with Niagara Connects since its inception, and we have supported the creation and the maintenance of the Living in Niagara report since its first edition in 2008. Like most funders, we rely on evidence and information to guide our grant-making priorities. Many of you know that all the information on our discretionary grants being those that you apply by application, can be found on our website. So Mary has provided a screenshot here of the grants section of our website. Our next grant intake is for the David S. House Fund Grant. It is due Monday, March 28th by noon. I should mention that all of our discretionary grant program deadlines will have a Monday at noon deadline. We are able to grant to registered charities and qualified donees. And if there's any questions around eligibility, you can speak to me directly at the time of our grant consult. The David S. House Fund Grant is one of 3 of our grant programs that do require you, the applicant, to refer to the Living in Niagara report to help make your case for support. The other ones that align with Living in Niagara are our mini grant program and our community grant program. Their details, links to the application, deadlines can be found under their header under this section of our website. That's niagaracommunityfoundation.org. Many of you have applied and are aware of some other grant programs like our environmental grants or summer camp grants. However, for the purpose of today's webinar, I will focus on the Living in Niagara report application alignments. Next slide, please. I should mention, and you'll see it here on this slide, that in addition to aligning with the Living in Niagara report, the mini grants, the community grants, and the David S. Howe Fund grants, they do have a capacity building priority area. So those are tools, equipment, resources that your organization may need to be more successful. But as I mentioned, for the purpose of today's webinar, I will focus on the Living in Niagara report priority area. And I should mention, the Living in Niagara report priority area grant making makes up last year, nearly 70% of all the grants that we awarded in 2021. I have been told by many of you that examples are helpful in understanding how the Niagara Community Foundation grants in respect to the Living in Niagara report. So I have provided 3 strong examples, and that might help give you a better sense on how we're granting in this way. So my first example is with Pathstone Mental Health. Many of you know that they provide mental health supports for children across Niagara. The Living in Niagara Health and Wellness section tells us that there is an increase in need for mental health supports. And as a community, we need to improve access and programming experiencing for children and youth and their families who are seeking mental health supports. So Pathstone did receive a David S. Howe Fund grant to support the expansion of hours of service at their mental health walk-in clinics across Niagara. My second example here is Westview for Women. Westview Center for Women is a weekly resource center where women of all walks of life are welcomed into a safe and open and affirming environment. So the Living in Niagara report tells us that community belonging is essential. Our community needs to mitigate the impact of social isolation on our health and well-being. For this grant, it was around a physical space. So Westview did receive a community grant to support their project to construct a safe, inclusive outdoor space for their clients and their children. And my third example is Jillian's Place. You may know Jillian's Place has providing safe shelter and support programs in an effort to end domestic violence, I think for more than 50 years now in Niagara. The Living in Niagara report community safety section tells us that women's shelters have seen a tremendous, dramatic increase in the instances and severity of domestic violence, and that community supports are essential due to the increased need for their services. So Jillian's Place did receive a 2021 David S. Howe Fund grant to support renovations to their shelter that keeps women and children safe. So these are 3 examples across 3 different sections of the Living in Niagara report. Of course, there are many other aspects that make a strong application to the Niagara Community Foundation, such as the agency's capacity to take on the project, the financial viability of a project. But I have to stress that the case for support and providing good evidence is essential in grant writing, especially to us at the Niagara Community Foundation. In closing, I just want to congratulate Niagara Connects. We feel they provided our community with an accessible platform that gives us access to reliable and timely information that we can use across many aspects of our work. We find the Living in Niagara report platform easy to navigate. However, my door is always open. If you're having some challenges or have some questions regarding the Living in Niagara report and your application to the Niagara Community Foundation, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Thank you. That's it for me today. I am able to stay to the very end and take any questions you may have. And now I'll pass it on to Tammy Dumas.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. So good morning, everybody. I'm Tammy Dumas. I'm the Executive Director with INCommunities in 211 Central South Region in Ontario. And I'd first like to take this opportunity to extend a genuine thanks and appreciation to Joanne and Brian and the Niagara Community Foundation for their continued investment and support of Niagara Connects and the Living in Niagara report. And of course, I want to also thank our other community partner subscribers, many of whom are on the call with us today, for their continued support and investment in the program. It allows this great work to continue. I'd also like to thank Mary Wiley for her ongoing commitment, her steadfast resilience to the work involved in gathering the evidence, meeting with community partners to bring the report to fruition over the years for Niagara. So thank you, Mary. And thanks to everybody today for joining us on this webinar. It is so great to see such interest in learning about the Living in Niagara report and how people can use it in our community to support their work, their life perhaps, and certainly their planning. As Mary mentioned, the 2020 report does contain 211 data, along with many other data elements from other important sources. And we thought today was an important opportunity to briefly highlight how 211 data can be used to inform your planning, community investments, and how it can be used for social good. So I'll speak briefly to that now. For those who don't know, 211 is a provincial helpline, a fully integrated provincial helpline. It is free. It's a 3-digit phone number. It's available 24/7, 365 days a year. 211, we receive inquiries, as we call them, through the helpline, so telephone calls, online chat, text in certain communities, and email. And we call all of those together our contacts, and we collect data and evidence around those contacts. Another important part of the 211 service is the community database that we maintain and that we curate. So in regions across Ontario, we have data editors and data specialists who maintain and develop our local community information. And then we share that provincially with our partners so that anybody calling 211 from anywhere in Ontario receives the same up-to-date validated information about community services that are available. The data that we can share back to the community from the service that we provide and the information that we gather falls into 2 primary categories. One is 211 contact data, and the other is 211 resource data. And I'll speak very briefly to each of those. Next slide, Lisa. So 211 contact data, for example, is what's reflected in the 2020 Living in Niagara report. What I've shared here with you is we now have a public user needs dashboard where any community partner, any individual can go and retrieve their own data around calls to 211 and what services people are looking for. What we track in terms of community data or contact data, it's important to note that we track about 85% of our total inquiries. So it's not 100%. And the data that we can provide would include the number of inquiries, both that have come in and also the ones that we were able to answer. Including in that contact data would be the needs that people present. So certainly we will have more needs than we will have inquiries. And we also can track the unmet needs. And so what that means is where are there gaps in services for, or in particular communities. Pardon me. We can also dig a little deeper, as we've done with community partners who are looking for richer, more robust information, often about particular gaps in terms of what isn't available. We can drill that down in working with partners as well. And we do collect information that can provide some lens into neighborhood challenges or how neighborhoods are doing. We do only collect the first 3 digits of postal code information, as callers will provide them to us. Just an example in terms of contact data that we can, the screen or the slide that you see there, so that's 2022, that's a to-date report, and that one reflects all of Ontario. And you'll see to the right of that we can certainly drill down on any region or community that you'd like information on. In Niagara, for example, in 2021, we answered 23,400 calls that came into 211 or contacts in total. The number 1 need that people were calling 211 about in 2021 was housing. I can share with you in 2020, the year that the pandemic began, the #1 need was related to government services, as we can, I'm certainly imagine why, with all of the changes that were taking place following the emergence of the pandemic. So in 2021, the top need was housing, and the second need was health. And interesting, in 2021, the top unmet need was housing. And we had approximately 1,000 unmet needs in 2021 in Niagara, and the top of those were housing, and the second was health. So always available to speak further to anybody who would like to know how we can work with you to provide the data that you're looking for. But if you can switch to the next slide, Lisa. Thank you. The second area where we can share information, and we do share information back to the community, is our resource data. And so for those of you who know the Niagara Community Information Database, that has seen some changes over the last year. But that's data that we curate and we maintain locally, and certainly we feed up to Ontario, so our telephone navigators have access to that, but it's obviously publicly searchable and widely used by people now who are self-searching for the services that they're looking for. That data can also be shared out with our community partners when they're looking at perhaps looking to create unique views for particular services that they want to create a digital space for. Most recently, what was very exciting is we used our resource data using API technology in partnership with the Age Friendly Niagara Network, now the Age Friendly Niagara Council, to build the Older Adult Info Link. And the Older Adult Info Link was successfully launched in December of last year. It was a labor of love. It was many years in the making, based on many, many consultations with the Age Friendly Niagara Network, many focus groups, and community partners involved in that work. So we were thrilled to launch the link. This is a slide. Happy to share that link out for those who may not be familiar with it. But again, that's just another example of how we can share our resource data out to the community to better increase access to services and information for people who are looking for it. So on that note, I will pause and say thank you very much and hand it back to Mary.
Thank you, Tammy. And it's interesting on that last point that Tammy was making, the Age Friendly Niagara Council, they're now a council, to be a council on aging, like many other communities in Ontario. They created something called the Niagara Aging Strategy and Action Plan and launched it in 2015. And through all of the consultations leading up to that and since, this concept of building a tool where older adults, their families and caregivers could go and find information specific to that population kept emerging. So if you were watching what was included in the community belonging sector of the Living in Niagara report over the different iterations, you would have seen that emerging. And it's really cool to see that that evidence that was driven by the community came to fruition through the Older Adult Info Link. And interesting too that the Community Foundation funded that, the work to build that tool. So you can see how that all sort of ties together. So this is just a slide to sort of sum up, to help you find, give you the pathways to find the information. So remember to look at those sector technical documents on the livinginniagarareport.com website. And if you need any assistance, please reach out and we can help to point you in the right direction. I would also encourage you to think of all these resources as pathways to additional evidence. That's the other thing, is that once you start digging, you might find something new that's just hot off the press. And the other thing is, if you want to be connected with regular updates of information being shared out through the Niagara Knowledge Exchange, then please go to the Get Connected sector there and section on the website and get into the database. All right, so now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Suzanne Beanster with the Community Foundation, and she's going to facilitate questions and answers. And I think there might be a few that have come through on the chat.
Thanks, Mary. There's just a few questions that we would like to ask, and I'll just direct them to each individual who they might be relevant to. Joanne, there was a question that came in regarding the David S. House and the average dollar amount of the grants awarded. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, yeah, good question. So the David S. House Fund grant is only about 5 years old. To date, the average grant is approximately $40,000. I wanted to add the Community Foundation. We have 3 levels. Our mini grants are $750. Our community grants are a maximum of $15,000, and our David S. House Fund grants are larger than $15,000. And to date, the average has been around $40,000.
Great, thank you. Tammy, there's a couple of questions here for you. One question to start with is, if people would like to have some more custom data or being able to access specific reports, is there a way that they can do that? And can you explain a little bit about that process?
Absolutely. I think fairly simple. Just reach out to me directly or my data team, Vicki McMullen, who's been with us for quite some time, and we'd be happy to talk to you. I really encourage people as well to have a look at the public user needs dashboard, and to look at to see what's available through the public needs dashboard. But if there's an opportunity or need to drill down a little deeper, yeah, please reach out and we'll certainly see what we can do. And we've had requests in the past where the tools that we had available to us didn't get what we needed, but we've worked with Ontario 211 and on really diligently trying to get what people are looking for.
And a bit of a follow-up to that, Tammy.
Yeah.
You speak about the unmet needs within the community when you're taking those calls. Can you explain a little bit about how you track that? Is that something where you're doing follow-ups, or you're just not able to meet that need initially? Can you speak a little bit more about how that unmet needs are met or are tracked? And then I'm assuming that also then plays into the Living in Niagara report and kind of, again, speaking to those upcoming needs and emerging needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, great question. So we do, the system as a whole, we do try to do follow-up with individuals now so that we can measure outcomes. It's really important for us to see, were people able to connect with what they were looking for, what they needed at the time. So with permission and consent, we'll do those follow-up calls. And unmet needs, how we track unmet needs can be anything from, in follow-up, an individual saying that they couldn't connect with a service. And an unmet need could be, the number one unmet need I can share last year related to housing was waitlist. So unavailable or waitlist. Another unmet need would be ineligible. People are ineligible based on the criteria for particular programs. We see that as a top 3 unmet need for services all the time. And sometimes just availability, the service is just not available. So that was something we don't need to do follow-up for. We know that there's not a service that we can refer somebody to.
Tammy, just a follow-up question to the previous one as well. Is there a cost associated with that request for customized data?
So it does depend what the work involved in terms of customizing a report that you're looking for. So happy to please reach out to me directly and happy to have that conversation.
That's great.
Yeah.
And Mary, I'll just close with a question for you, and then I'll pass it back to you unless other questions do come in. A technical or just a logistical question: if people would like to have access to a hard copy of the report, is that available for access, or how could they go about doing that?
So let's connect for a conversation. So if people are interested, we can chat about that. And with this most recent edition, it was really interesting because at the time it came out, there were a lot of people who were not wanting to have hard copies of anything. If you remember that, we went through a little phase of that, right? So we viewed that a little differently this time around. We've also heard that some people really like to have a hard copy, and some people said they really want to be able to access the information online. So we've been kind of riding a balance there. So if anyone's interested, connect with us, and we'll see what we can do to help you out.
And I think one of the benefits of that online, and that just is kind of, I think that you made mention of this already, you do kind of updates or those hyperlinks within the online version connect you to the most recent data, even if the report is a couple years old. There's internal links that will connect you to the most recent data. Is that correct?
Yes. So those the technical documents that I showed you, I intentionally highlighted those because I've walked through it with a few people, and they say, "Oh, I didn't really realize I could find that there." So we know that it's something that it's almost like learn to do by doing. If you click through and see what's there, what we've always encouraged people to do is take a look at, in each of the sectors, whatever sectors you're looking at, take a look at the report. So for example, I'll use a couple of examples. Libraries in Ontario report their data up to the province, and then that evidence comes back out through a website with statistics for all the libraries in Ontario. So if you want to go in there, you can pull those out by region. Well, you know, this report came out and would have had the most recent version of that at the time. When you go to the link where that's housed, you can see if there is an updated version, you can check it out. Same thing. Another example is there are statistics that come out through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. So it's been reported up by the local police association. It goes up and then it gets fed back down. So you can go in and find those statistics as we have them in this technical document, because it was the most recent version at the time. And that's a pathway. There might be a more recent version out there. So that's just two examples. Again, just it's almost like you're I keep likening it to digging for gold, right? That it's a bit of a pathway, and you might learn something extra than you thought you were going to find in here when you go into these documents. So
that's great. I think that concludes our question and answer. Thank you all of you for all of your resources and input, and I'll pass it back to you, Mary.
All right, so just a reminder that we'll send you a really quick little survey in follow-up to just get your thinking about how this event went. It helps us to strengthen these events as we present ones going forward. And as well, we will be sending you a follow-up package that has the recording of the webinar. It will be posted on the Knowledge Exchange, and then any other related resources. And if you think of any questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to have a chat with you. So thank you. I think that's it for today, and thank you for joining us. And we'll give you the gift of time, as Tammy Dumas says. You have an extra 10 minutes in your hour. Have a good day.